All right, let's dive in. We're going to tackle one of the biggest, most ambitious ideas in all of psychology, the quest to create a scientific blueprint for human personality. Basically, to map out what makes you, you.
So here's the big question, right? Can you actually measure something as messy and, well, human as a personality with the same kind of scientific precision you'd use for chemistry? It sounds a little crazy, but this was the mission of a psychologist named Raymond Cattell. And for him, the answer wasn't just maybe, it was a definite yes.
You know, what's fascinating is that Cattell didn't even start out in psychology. Nope, his degree was in chemistry. But everything changed for him after living through the absolute devastation of World War I. He came to believe that the world's real problems weren't in a test tube, they were human problems. He thought, hey, if we can just scientifically understand what makes us tick, why we're so irrational sometimes, maybe, just maybe, we could stop things like that from ever happening again.
So, how in the world do you even begin to map a personality scientifically? Well, Cattell had a secret weapon. It was this really powerful statistical tool called factor analysis. Now think of it like this, and this is where his chemistry background really comes in handy. Imagine you've got this complex, murky soup of chemicals. Factor analysis is like the ultimate filter. It distills everything down, separating all the junk to find the pure core ingredients. For Cattell, that soup was all of human behavior, and he was hunting for the core elements, the fundamental traits that make up personality.
See, before Cattell came along, a lot of psychology was kinda simplistic. It used what's called a bivariate method, which is just a fancy way of saying it looked at only two things at a time, like cause and effect. Simple. But Cattell was like, no way. A person is way too messy and complicated for that. He championed a multivariate approach, which meant looking at hundreds of variables all at once to get the full interconnected picture of who someone is.
And this really shows you how committed he was to the data. His method had it had a bit of a mouthful of a name. He called it the inductive hypothetico-deductive spiral. Yeah, I know. But the idea behind that crazy name is actually super straightforward. You start with what you can actually see and measure, real-world data. Then you make a small guess, a hypothesis. You test it, you tweak it based on what you find, and then you do it all over again. It's a spiral. The key thing is, he built his theory from the ground up, piece by piece, instead of just starting with some big idea and trying to prove it.
Okay, so after all that grinding, scientific work, what did he actually decide personality is? Well, for Cattell, the definition was incredibly direct and practical. He said personality is simply the thing that lets us predict what someone will do in any given situation. That's it. It's not some abstract concept. It's the direct, predictable link between who you are on the inside and what you do on the outside.
He even boiled this whole idea down into a simple formula. R is equal to FSP. Okay, what does that mean? Your response, that's the R, is a function of the situation you're in, the S, and your personality, the P. And this is so important. What he's saying is, you can never understand why someone does something without looking at both their internal personality and the external situation they're in. You need both pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, so if personality is made up of all these traits, how do you even keep them organized? Well, Cattell had a system for that. Let's take a look.
So Cattell sliced and diced traits in a few different ways, but the absolute most important distinction he made was between surface traits and source traits. It's actually a pretty cool idea. Think of surface traits as the stuff you can see on the surface. Things like being talkative or anxious or organized. But source traits? Those are the deep, hidden drivers causing those surface behaviors. Cattell wasn't satisfied just describing what people did. He wanted to find the fundamental source code of personality that made them who they were. That was the real prize.
And this hunt for those deep, foundational source traits, this is what led him to his life's great work. We're talking about decades of intense research, sifting through literally thousands and thousands of different words used to describe people.
So after all that analysis, all that distillation of over 4,500 different traits, his factor analysis pointed to one core number, 16. That was it. He proposed that there are 16 fundamental source traits, the basic building blocks of every single human personality.
Now, what's really important to get here is that these aren't just 16 boxes you either fit in or you don't. Think of each one as a slider, a spectrum. Take warmth, for example. You're not just warm or not warm. You can be super affectionate on one end, really reserved on the other, or literally anywhere in between. And it's the same for all of them. Dominance, liveliness, tension, you name it. Your unique personality is just your specific, one-of-a-kind combination of where you land on each of those 16 sliders.
And Cattell didn't think we were just born with these traits fully formed. Not at all. He actually mapped out how our personalities develop over our entire lives. He argued that while our genes and early childhood are huge influences at the start, our social circles and life experiences become more and more important as we go through childhood and our teen years. Then, things tend to kind of settle and stabilize in adulthood before we hit our later years, which he saw as a time for reflection.
Now, this theory wasn't just some academic exercise. It had a huge real-world impact and led to some widely used psychological tools. But, and this is a big but, Cattell's legacy is also really complicated. It's a story of both incredible scientific application and later, some very serious controversy.
So, on the one hand, his work gave us the famous 16PF questionnaire. That's the 16 personality factor test. It's still used today for things like career counseling. But he didn't stop with just normal personality. He went on to create something called the Clinical Analysis Questionnaire, the CAQ, which built on his system by adding 12 more traits to help clinicians understand and diagnose psychological issues. And his scientific obsession showed in how he collected his data, too. He was adamant about using 3 different kinds of evidence. First, there was L-data, which stands for life records, stuff like school grades or work history. Then Q-data, from questionnaires where people rate themselves. And finally, T-data, from objective tests where you can't really fake your answers. For him, you could only be confident in a conclusion if the evidence from all 3 sources pointed to the same thing.
But, as I mentioned, his legacy took a very dark turn towards the end of his life. He faced some incredibly serious accusations, specifically that he was using his scientific work to back up ideas related to eugenics and racial superiority.
Now, Cattell himself pushed back hard against this. He flatly denied the allegations. His defense was that he was a scientist, pure and simple, and that he was just following the objective data wherever it led. He maintained his conclusions weren't driven by any kind of personal ideology.
This whole debate really came to a head in 1997. The American Psychological Association was about to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award, but because of all the controversy, they pulled it. Cattell was in poor health at the time. He basically withdrew from the public eye and passed away the very next year.
And all of this leaves us with one last pretty deep thought to chew on. Cattell spent his entire life trying to create a formula for being human, to make us predictable. So if his formula, remember, R equals F of SP, if that's even a little bit right, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of the unique person you feel like you are is actually just predictable code?